Hey, how's it going, everybody? How's it going, Sonia?
Good. How are you?
Oh, just peachy and wonderful. You know how it goes. Um, I'm really excited to be here tonight. Happy Friday. Welcome to another Live with Love. We've got a really great show planned, and I'm excited to be here to talk about it. We have a couple of things planned, but before we get started, I just want to bring attention to this fancy thing.
Woo.
We're sporting Lakeshore's United Visionaries merch tonight that you can buy from our website if you're interested. It's lakeshoresunitedvisionaries.org/merch. And the cool thing about that is if you're looking to support our organization, the money will come back to us. So that's really great. And well, let's get the party started because there's a lot going on tonight, and we've got a pretty full show. So we were talking in our board meetings about information and the importance of finding accurate information and good information. And we have a newly elected board member who we're very excited to have in amongst our ranks who happens to know a lot about information and how to find good information and accurate information. And she actually suggested that we do this live with love tonight, and we're really glad that she did. So, without further ado, we're going to bring our friendly neighborhood librarian into the room, Miss Julia Lee. Hello. Oh, I have to unmute your mic. Okay, I did it.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi.
Julia.
Me. I'm super excited to be here as well. Happy Friday.
Yay! We do love a Good Friday moment, don't we?
And there is no better way to spend your Friday than learning about evaluating information sources. I can't imagine a bigger party. I really can't. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
It should be a good time. And as Kevin said, we were kind of talking about information and the importance of gathering trustworthy information, how difficult it is nowadays to do that. And as a librarian, it's very near and dear to my heart. So I'm very excited to share hopefully some helpful tips to help everyone be more mindful consumers of information, because it is really difficult, just the sheer amount of misinformation that can be out there. And how do you know what's trustworthy and how do you know what's not? So I'm going to share some, like I said, some tips, some ways to evaluate those sources. And I'm happy to answer questions along the way. And if ever in doubt, you can always ask your friendly neighborhood librarians at Manitowoc Public Library. We're always happy to help you evaluate that information. Little disclaimer before I start the program. Misinformation is a nonpartisan. So both sides can be guilty, of course, of misinformation. So I am going to have some examples tonight, just of good journalism and some examples of what to look for. So I'm pulling from current events. So you might see some partisan headlines, but the show or the theme of the show is just evaluating sources. So I just want everybody to know it is unbiased. And evaluating resources is good no matter what your leaning is. So that's my little partisan disclaimer.
I love it.
It's for everybody. All right. I think I'm ready. You guys ready? Ooh, there we go. I love StreamYard. It's so cool. Okay, so
here we go.
Fact versus fiction. How do you know what information to trust? Fake news and misinformation is not a new thing, but with the internet, of course, there's just more than ever to kind of sift through. So how do you know what's trustworthy and what's not? Let's go to the next slide.
Oops.
There you go. Thanks, Kevin. So one of the tips I'm going to give you tonight is check your author, check your source. So who am I to be telling you about information resources? I wanted to give you some background on me. So I am Julia Lee, the Youth Services Manager at Manitowoc Public Library, and I have my Master's of Library and Information Science. So I went to school and took classes and got trained on how to evaluate information and research methodology, which is way more exciting to me than it sounds. So I am happy to share some information and some tips on evaluating that information. We can go to the next slide, Kevin. Thank you. So how do we evaluate news sources? So this might be surprising, at least it was to me, to find out how contentious this was, because people get really attached to their news sources. So sometimes when you even bring up the idea of evaluating news sources, it can be a little contentious. And for fact checking, there are two different things we talk about. We talk about news gathering, basically where organizations are gathering the facts, they're doing the investigative work, they're doing the they're doing journalism, and they're just presenting these facts. So that's pretty unbiased. And then news analysis is where things can get a little skewed, because news analysis takes those facts and then puts them into a larger narrative. And depending on which way it's leaning, it could tell you a different story. For example, one side could say Senator Sanders is an effective legislator behind the scenes, and another side could take the same facts and say Senator Sanders is a largely ineffective senator behind the scenes. So news gathering in and of itself is unbiased, and then news analysis is where things can get a little confusing for people. Next. Okay, so what do I mean by unbiased, slanted, and biased? There are generally three groups that news sources can fall into. So unbiased, if we want to click to get my fun little animation in there. Unbiased basically means it's reporting the news and facts completely objectively and not putting a news analysis spin on it. And a good example of that, if we click again, is going to be one example I like to give is BBC World News. BBC is a really great example. They present the facts. They have really high standards of journalism, and they generally don't try to skew a story one way or the other. So BBC World News is a great example of unbiased news sources and really good information. So that's completely unbiased, completely down the middle. The next type is slanted. Oh, thanks, Kevin. You're getting good. Slanted news sources still represent the facts, but they're going to skew it so they tell you what you already know. They're going to give you stories, but they're going to kind of push it so it puts one group in a more favorable light and another group in a disfavorable light. And my example of that is the Washington Post. So this is slanted liberal. So the Washington Post, they're going to give you the story, but they're just going to slant it a little bit so it favors liberals over conservatives. Again, still telling you the story, still telling you the facts, but they are going to spin it a little bit to make one group look a little more favorable. And then the last type is biased. This is the most dangerous type of news sources because they tell you what you want to hear. So they take story and they can fundamentally change how you interpret those facts. My example of this is Fox News. Fox News can fundamentally change those facts in order to put one group in a better light and one group in a worse light. Now, if you're sitting there and going, and I know this can be a contentious issue. Oh my gosh, she just named some of my favorite sources of news. Am I telling you to never read those sources again or never watch those sources again? No, that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is if you see, if you're like, oh my gosh, I read the Washington Post or I watch Fox News all the time. What I would recommend is if you are taking in a news article or watching a segment and you see something kind of shocking, I would recommend maybe consult some other news sources as well and see what they say on that same subject and see if there's a consistent storyline or if your primary news source is maybe going off in a different direction. Because if we're consulting different news sources and seeing if there's a common ground, that's going to give you more of an idea of what's the most accurate story. I'm ready for the next. So how do we spot fake news? This is a wonderful graphic from the International Federation of Library Associations. And we're going to go through this infographic, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to spot that fake news and how to evaluate some information. So are you guys ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So our very first one, if we go to the next slide, we're going to consider the source. So you're going to want to do more than just click on the story. You're going to want to click away from the story to investigate the site itself, its mission, and its contact information. So let's go and see an example of what I mean by this. I found this great headline on Breitbart.com. If you notice, it has a picture of Dr. Fauci and it has Dr. Doom crossed off and now he's Dr. Snake and there's snake emojis. And this right here is really inflammatory. It's kind of a red flag for me because what the headline is telling you, they're using the terms Doom and Snake, and the headline is stabs Trump in the back. This is a really inflammatory headline to get you get an emotional response from you. It almost doesn't matter what the news article is. You're already mad at this guy and you've already made a judgment on this subject. So if I click away from this headline, if I'm like, this looks pretty inflammatory, I'm not sure if this is unbiased or not. If I clicked away, I went and I explored their site a little bit. So Kevin, if you wouldn't mind clicking, I should have a little animation coming in. So I went and I clicked around and I saw in their shop, they were selling items that were clearly conservative leaning, extreme conservative leaning. So that tells me, just by kind of exploring the site, that this site is biased. And this news article, in addition with that inflammatory headline, is probably not going to give me the most unbiased source of this story. So I'd probably want to look at a different source than just take this at face value. Although I really love the name Dr. Doom Snake. If we combine those, I feel like that could be a really good villain name. I don't know. I'm into that. I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Hey, Julia, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
And I do apologize if I'm getting ahead of the presentation a little bit.
Okay.
But we're talking about fake news, right? Can slanted, how do we differentiate between like slanted news and fake news? Is there a differentiation between the two?
Yeah. So how I like to think of it is that slanted news is still going to give you information, right? It's not garbage. It's still going to give you a story, but it's going to shed that story in a very particular light. So it's going to give the facts, like the example I gave for news analysis was Senator Sanders is a largely effective legislator. And it could give you the same facts. And then another slanted paper could give the same facts and say he's an ineffective senator. It just depends on what your perspective is, but it's based on the same facts. If you're going with a biased source for fake news, it's going to be fake news could be a wide range of things. It could be totally made up if it was fake news, but a biased source generally is going to have truth in there. It's just going to fundamentally change how you interpret those facts. So it's going to take those facts and spin it in a way that it's intending the audience to come to a certain conclusion about the facts instead of just presenting them as facts. Does that make sense? It's going to try to determine, Kevin,
yes.
You make up your mind about those facts, and it wants you to draw those conclusions. So from this article, the conclusion it wants you to draw is that this guy is a traitor. He stabs people in the back. He's like a snake. So really, no matter what the article says about him, you already have made up your mind that he is untrustworthy and he's kind of the villain, regardless of what the news article actually says. So it's going to try to fundamentally change those facts so you draw a certain conclusion, which is kind of dangerous.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I'm glad. Thanks for asking that question. It's a good one. Next. Okay, so some things to look for. If you're looking around that site and you want to see like, oh, I'm not sure if this is biased or not, I'm not sure if it's trustworthy, I've got a couple tips. So first of all, look for some unusual URLs. If it has a strange ending with hyphens or it says .com, .co, that's a really popular one for like those fake sites. Chances are they are not legitimate news sites. So make sure you're really evaluating the URL. And dissect the layout. If it has grammatical errors, that's a huge red flag because any legitimate news site is going to make sure they have people looking for grammatical errors, incorrect dates, those bold inflammatory claims with no sources that they cite, and sensationalist image that are all there to evoke an emotional response. Those are some definite red flags to look for. Number 3, just dig deeper. Find out who wrote the article. Who is this person who says they're an expert in this field? A simple LinkedIn search or a Google search can really do wonders to kind of shed light on who is this person who claims to be an expert. Number 4, cross-check. There are some really great fact-checking sites that you can use to confirm information, and I have those, some of my top choices at the end of the presentation for those fact-checking sites you can use. And number 5, try a reverse image search. This is really popular in fake news where they take a picture and then they put an entirely different story with the same picture. So if you do a reverse image search and you see the same picture with a different news story attached to it, chances are it's probably going to be suspicious that there's 2 different news stories with this one image. So again, these 5 tips, doing the reverse image search, just checking out the author, the layout, even the URL can point you in the right direction when you're looking for credible news sources. All right. Ready for the next one? All right, so those inflammatory headlines can catch our eye, and that's exactly what the news sites want us to do, right? They got that clickbait. They want us to click on it. They want us to go to their site. So headlines can be pretty outrageous. So what's the whole story? We want to read beyond just the headline, and I've got a great example that I found. I had a lot of fun actually searching for bad examples online. So let's go to the next one and see my example. Oh no, piranhas in the Great Lakes. I found this pretty ridiculous and outrageous headline. And yes, that's a picture of piranhas. So it says 4 dangerous species that swim in Lake Michigan's waters. Oh no, not piranhas. So I want to just take a second and just look at this image. First of all, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, it's a blog. It's some guy's blog. So I did a little search on who this guy is. He's in marketing, and he also has his own line of products with that Live in Fresh marketing brand on it. So basically this guy who has a blog really wants to get clicks, and so puts this really inciting headline up there and a picture of piranhas. So we go, oh my goodness, piranhas in the Great Lakes. I have to click and read about this. And then it takes you to his site where he wants to sell you stuff. Bottom line is there are no piranhas in Lake Michigan. Don't worry. But I thought this was just a beautiful example of kind of looking to see, okay, it's on somebody's blog. This guy is a marketing director. He probably shouldn't be writing about biology of the Great Lakes. And he uses that inflammatory headline to get people over to his site. So I thought that made me giggle. I really, once in a while, there are those stories that people post on Facebook. Somebody caught a great white shark in Lake Michigan, and it's completely fake news. I've had a couple of those that I've seen on like my cousin's Facebook pages where I'm like, can you cite your source for this? I'm not sure if this is a verifiable story. So I promise you there's no piranhas in the Great Lakes. All right, ready for the next one. All right, so again, like the blog author, check the author, do a quick search. Are they credible for one, and are they real for another? So just because the old adage, anyone can say they're a doctor online, they can. So doing a quick check on the author will really help let you know, okay, is this a credible source or is this person made up? I'm ready for the next slide. And another thing is to expect accountability. So a couple ways that sites prove accountability. So everyone on an accountable site will sign their stories, and they take personal responsibility for the content. There are very high standards of journalism in most major news outlets, and the journalists take personal responsibility for the content. Articles, and a byline is basically the name of the author. A lack of a byline or an author is a huge red flag for indicating suspect content, because no one is taking accountability or responsibility for what the information is. So check if that byline is there. And if it's linked, click on the link. Most of the time, it will take you to like a profile page or more information about the author. So click on the link and see where it leads and what information you can find out. And last case scenario, Google the author names. That can shed a lot of light. Do they have a LinkedIn profile, some sort of biographical information? What other kind of articles has this author written on in the past? And do they have a background that qualifies them to write on article topics? Next. All right, so another thing you can do to evaluate sources is click on those supporting sources, or see what the supporting sources are. Click on those links in those articles and determine if the information that's given actually supports the story. And I really love this little cartoon. I feel like I'd be that person at a political rally holding up that sign. And the sign, if you can't say it, says citation needed.
I can totally see you doing that too.
Cite your sources. I feel like we should make our politicians accountable for those statements they say, right? So cite your sources. All right, so let's go to the next slide. I have a good example. This is from BBC, and I am, like a good librarian at the bottom, I have a source for all of my examples, and I've got a works cited at the end. So I am also citing my sources. But I highlighted every time the BBC in this article cited a source. So you'll notice basically in every paragraph or every time they are giving the audience information. They are saying exactly where they got that information from. So that's a good example of, okay, they're getting this from the Indian Army statement. They're getting this from the Times of India. They're getting this from the Foreign Ministry spokesman. They're telling you exactly where they're getting their information from and what that source is saying. Notice they're not making commentary on this information they're getting. They're simply providing you the information in an unbiased fashion. Way to go, BBC. Next. All right, this one seems really simple, but we see this at least I see this all the time on social media. Friends and relatives reposting old articles. And at first I'm like, oh my gosh, oh no way, how can that be happening? And then you click on the link and you realize, oh, this happened 6 years ago. So sometimes that date can really get people. And if you're not looking for it, it can trick you. So my example on the next slide probably was the biggest example I can think of in recent years, which is why I included it. So back right after the 2016 election, this news article was circulating, and it started off on a conservative leaning blog that Trump was responsible for Ford shifting production from Mexico to Ohio, and giving Trump credit after the 2016 election for these new factories being built in Ohio. But I highlighted the date. If you can see that, the date is actually from August 2015. And so what happened was this blog writer took CNN's article, put a new headline on it, which is illegal and copyright infringement, by the way, and then put it out on the internet again. And it went crazy. People started sharing it. And it went pretty far before someone finally went, this is an article from 2015. And it all went back to just simply checking the date. So it had nothing to do with the 2016 election. It happened in August 2015. And just checking that date and knowing the source it came from could save a lot of confusion. Next. Okay, this is one of my favorites. Is it a joke? And I just loved this headline that I pulled, that Biden announced Secretary of Health and Human Services will be a ring of diverse children holding hands. That is a ridiculous headline. And if you click and I get my little animation, it is from The Onion. And The Onion is a pretty well-known satirical news source, which means it's a joke. It's a pretty outrageous headline. So if you're looking at a headline and you're like, this doesn't seem like it could be real, sometimes it's not. And sometimes with The Onion, I mean, I feel like a lot of people know what The Onion is. They know it's a satirical news source. But there are other satirical news sources out there that might not be as clear, as we'll see on my next slide.
Okay, here we go.
So this is the tricky one that I found that I had to include, because this is from a news source called World News Daily Report. And it says, news you can trust. But if you scroll down on their disclaimer to the next slide, it specifically says that the World News Daily Report shall not be responsible for any incorrect or inaccurate information. They are, however, responsible for the satirical nature of the article and the fictional nature of the content. And everything in their newspaper is fictional, which is really confusing if someone doesn't know what this news site is and they say it's news you can trust and they don't read the disclaimer. So World News Daily Report is another satirical news source. So bottom line is, if an article or a headline seems so ridiculous it can't be true, sometimes it isn't. So again, is it satire? And that just you can find that out by just clicking around the website and finding more information about it. I love The Onion. This one is a little tougher. Check your biases. Consider if your own beliefs could affect your judgment. And this is difficult for everybody because we're all human. We all have inherent bias. And our own bias is why our personal news sources and even asking someone to evaluate their personal news source can be so contentious. So let's talk a little bit about what bias actually means. And I got that information on my next slide. Oh, thanks, Kevin. So what is a bias? It's a tendency to believe that some people or ideas are better than others, which often results in treating some people unfairly. And there are different kinds of bias. So an explicit bias is an attitude or belief that we are aware of. So a good example of explicit bias is political affiliation. That's something that you are aware of. You are aware of that you are biased towards one group and against another. Implicit bias is a little trickier. we all have implicit bias that we are somewhat conscious of or not conscious at all. So it's attitudes or beliefs about other people or ideas or issues that are outside of our conscious awareness, but they really do affect how we interact with others and how we perceive information. So everybody has implicit biases, even when we try to remain objective. But it's okay. We can work to combat and change these biases. And just being aware that we have them is a step in the right direction. What really affects or builds upon that is confirmation bias. It's our subconscious tendency to seek and interpret information that affirms these beliefs we already have. And this is where those news sources come from, because so often those slanted or biased news sources feed into our confirmation bias. We want to hear that we're right, we believe the right things, and the other people are wrong. And that's where fake news can really feed into this kind of ugly confirmation bias. And just being aware of this can help combat it, just like implicit bias, because the confirmation bias is going to elicit a really strong emotional response in us, because we're humans. We like to know that we're right. And that's where being aware of your news sources and being able to step back and critically analyze, like, okay, is this trying to evoke an emotional response in me? Is this credible? Take a step back, take a breath, and be able to evaluate it objectively is really important, and can help you just know which information is actually worth consuming. So we could do an entire presentation on bias. It deserves such a bigger conversation than this, but that's the different types of bias and how it can affect our news consumption in a very small nutshell.
Yes.
There's so much more. There's so much more to this topic. All right. So what else can you do? Ask the experts. You can ask a librarian. We love to help with this stuff. So many times I'm talking to people who are like, oh, I don't want to bother the librarians. They have too much to do. And we're sitting there going, we want to help you. This is what we love to do. Please ask us. So please ask your friendly neighborhood librarians. We can certainly help. If you just don't know if this site is trustworthy or is this news article real, just give us a call. You can shoot us an email. We'd be happy to help. And we also have resources on our website, manitowoclibrary.org. We have databases that usually you would have to pay a subscription for, but the library pays a subscription for it. One of the best research databases we have is something called BadgerLink. It's Wisconsin's online library, and it provides a variety of information, research databases, peer-reviewed articles, so you can get really rich information that is verified and accurate, and it's free to you with your library card. So please do check out manitowoclibrary.org. If you click under research, there are databases, and we have dozens of databases that you can choose from and explore to help with your research, including newspaper archives. And then again, that Wisconsin Badger link is a fabulous treasure trove for research, and we'd be happy to help you navigate those as well. So please feel free to ask an expert, or on my next slide, I do have a list of fact-checking sites that I recommend. And not only me, don't take my word for it, take Cornell University's word for it as well. Factcheck.org is one of the ones that I use the most. The other highly rated ones are PolitiFact and Snopes.com and Washington Post Fact Checker. All of these are going to be really good information. If you go to these sites, they can help fact check different sources, different information, so you can see, is this real? Is this fake? And they'll give you deeper information on certain articles or certain headlines and what to trust, what not to trust. So out of all four of these, I'd recommend the most factcheck.org. That's the one I've personally used. And that's a really reliable news fact-checking site. And we're ready for the next. Okay, so what can you do about fake news? You can actually do a lot. Actually, it starts with the consumers. So the first thing we talked about, you learn to recognize fake news sites Be curious and actively investigate. Don't just take something at face value. Dig deeper to find out if something is actually true or not. And that use news sources that are accountable for their content and follow those high standards of journalistic ethics and standards. Like I talked about, my favorite example is BBC News. They have really high standards of journalism, but they're not the only ones. So as you're exploring credible news sites and evaluating sources, look for ones that have those really high standards of journalism. Use care before you're sharing. On Facebook, on social media, it's so tempting to share something when you're really upset and you see an article and you get really worked up about it. Be aware of those that arouse really strong emotions, either positive or negative, and take a second to evaluate it before you share. And then, of course, learn to recognize your own biases and reflect before you share something, or learn to compensate. Acknowledge that you have your own personal bias, and we can work to compensate and do that fact checking, even when our emotions are telling us one story. And we can go on to the next. So I have some simple tips to help stop the spread of misinformation. I use something called call the rule of 3. So if you see a headline, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. This is so outrageous or unbelievable, or this is making me so angry. Before you share it, before you take it to heart, I recommend check at least 3 other major credible news sources to see if they have if they're telling the same story. If you are seeing different news sites telling a different story, that's a reason to be suspicious. So before you share, just check it out. Check out what other news sources are saying, and make sure the narrative stays constant, and then you'll know it's verifiable news. Watch those URLs again. abcnews.com.co is not abcnews.com. It's a fake site, and you do not want to take news off there. So the best sources of information, I always recommend .edu, .gov, and .org. Those are going to be your 3 top choices for URLs when you're doing research. Again, check your emotions. If it's giving you a strong emotional response, that's probably its intention. Go beyond the emotions to see and use that checklist that we were talking about. Check the author. Check to make sure that site doesn't have grammatical errors. Make sure they're citing their sources to see if this is actually a credible news source. And when in doubt, it's okay to challenge people for their sources, but challenge respectfully. And I kind of talk about that on my next slide. So the problem with fake news, one of the problems with fake news, is the culture that evolves around fake news. When you start to challenge somebody's news sources, sometimes it feels like an attack against them and their personal beliefs because of those confirmation biases that we have. So oftentimes it turns into a shouting match, or really, a really heated argument on Facebook about a news article or a piece of information. So when we're challenging, I really encourage you to do so, but challenge respectfully. It's okay to challenge what people are saying without making it a personal attack. And we want to foster a culture, a community that encourages individuals to point out when statements are false, because it really benefits everybody to help discern the truth. Just do that in a respectful way. I know my family loves it when we're having conversations, and I ask them, what source did you use for that? Could you tell me where you got your information from? Because I honestly want to know as a librarian, and I want to make sure that they are getting their information from a credible source. It's really fun having Thanksgiving discussions with me, because I'm always asking could you cite your source for that, please? But it comes from a place of caring, because we want to make sure that we are spreading the truth, and a culture that engages in that kind of conversation about truth and information. I think we'd all be better off if we could have those conversations. Just do so respectfully. And I think I have one more. Do I have one more slide? Oh, like a good librarian, I included my works cited where I took, so I have 2 works cited pages where I got all of my resources. I highly recommend Cornell University's Learning to Critically Evaluate Media News Sources, the Pew Research Center, the International Federation of Library Associations. So I highly encourage you to check out my works cited and investigate even further. And I believe after I've got more. And And I believe that's it. And I stayed pretty close to time. I'm very impressed with myself. So thank you so much for letting me talk about evaluating news sources. It seems like it shouldn't be an issue, right? It seems like we should be able to trust where our news is coming from, but that's not the case in modern times. So if the news sources are confusing to you, if we're getting bombarded with misinformation, as a librarian, I just want to make sure everybody has those tools that they can evaluate information for themselves.
Absolutely. That was a beautiful presentation, Julia.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I really love talking about this stuff. I'm a big nerd as a librarian, so I always am happy to, if anybody ever has questions, please do contact the library. We're all big nerds and we love to help people. So the more truth that's out there, the better the world will be.
Exactly. I do have a quick little question.
Yeah.
I know that we could go on and on and on about bias, as you've mentioned.
Yeah.
But is there any kind of, this is kind of an objective question, but is there any kind of benefit to having or to finding biased resources or writing biased resources? Because we've dealt with this a lot lately. It's like Fox News versus NBC versus this. Is there any benefit from writing with a bias, or is it all just inciting anger?
You're asking me as a librarian? As a librarian, I can't condone writing from a bias. The advantage is that it incites emotion, right? So if you're asking me from an organizational standpoint, the advantage is the more emotional response, you're going to get more people to pay attention to you, to do the clickbait. So if you have an inflammatory headline or you have something that you know is going to get people really riled up, I mean, that's an advantage from that site's perspective. Also, it kind of fuels the base. So whether that's liberal or conservative, if you have a headline that you know is going to really ramp up your base or really speak to your base and your supporters, there's an advantage as well. As a librarian, I think it spreads that misinformation and is very counterproductive for our society. But that's one reason that a slanted or biased news source would do something like that. Again, those biased news sources are going to tell you what you want to hear. They're going to feed into your confirmation bias and make you feel like, yes, I'm right and those people are wrong, and I am on the side of what's right. And so it helps the organization from a support standpoint, but it really, I think, overall hurts society when you write from that. But does that answer your question, Kevin?
Oh, no, yeah, it definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely the main driving force behind why you'd want to spin things one way or the other.
Well, and money.
Exactly. If you have your support base, then you're gonna have more money. If you have more people tuning in and believing that you are right and you are the only one providing the right news, there's a lot of that's a quagmire right there. But it all does come down to money and support. And if you're riling people up and getting them really emotional, they're going to be supporting you more. So yeah, that's the ugly truth behind bias.
Yeah.
They're not really interested in sharing information at that point. They're interested in making money. Yeah.
Very
So
much.
I sort of have a question for you. I have kind of two of them, but I'll start with the first one. So in terms of databases, like what you were talking about that the library has, I was excited to find out that they had them because I didn't know that. But the first time that I learned about databases was in college because I had to use them. So I think your average consumer, your average person, maybe somebody that, people that haven't gone to school or haven't ever had to use a database before. Can you maybe briefly explain a little bit more about what a database is and maybe the fact that there's different types of ones that you can go for different types of research, and just navigating that a little bit.
Absolutely. Oh, I could do a whole nother presentation on navigating databases.
We've got a couple of Fridays in the year that we can use up for this, Julia.
Oh, Friday night database research. That is date night right there. I'm so glad you asked that question, Sonia, because sometimes in library world, you forget what is library jargon and what people might not know. So thank you for bringing that up, because that's one of my implicit biases, I guess, towards library world. So databases, the way I think of them is, on the internet, there's a lot of information. You don't know if it's good. You don't know if it's bad. Databases generally tend to have a focus of information, and all of the information there is verified. So other people are doing the fact checking. Oftentimes it's peer reviewed. So let's say, as you mentioned, there's different types of databases. Some can be, let's say, a database on health and like medical journals. And another database could be a scientific database on, I know we have one on climate change in Wisconsin, for example. Another can be a database on zoology. I'm just kind of pulling information or examples out of my head. But that database is going to have articles and journals that have been written by experts, fact-checked, and peer-reviewed by experts. So you know exactly what is on that database has been checked and double-checked, and it's accurate information. So when you're kind of sifting through all the rubble of the internet, this is kind of like mining for gold. or you're finding all the it's really good resources in one place. And we have a variety of databases. For example, the Badger Link, the Wisconsin Online Library, combines, oh my goodness, I don't even know how many databases. We have a huge amount. I hate to even throw out a number because I don't want to be inaccurate. We have a multitude of databases that were collected by Badger Link. So they took all these databases available and put them in one spot for you. So you can look through newspaper archive, for example. You can look through historical databases. You can look through health journals. And it also is sorted by age. So you can look for ones that are appropriate for middle school, look for ones that are appropriate for elementary school, look for ones that are appropriate for adults. So you can search in a variety of ways. I'd be happy to do a class on how to search databases because it is more than a Google search. So I do think it intimidates some people because it's a different way of searching. But like I said, it's like the gold of all the information on the internet. And usually you'd have to pay for a database subscription, but your amazing public library pays those subscriptions so you can access those for free. Does that kind of explain it a little bit better? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So I guess one question pertaining to databases, is there going to be something about current news? Like how often are these updated? Because of course, they have to be checked and double checked. So are we going to be able to like look at, something happened yesterday, like today, would there be information on that database about that event that happened?
Depends on the database. Most of the time you're correct. It takes a little bit longer because it needs to be peer reviewed and needs to be fact checked. So that's where the evaluating your resources comes from. That's where the tips that I have given you in this presentation, that's going to be more like in the moment, accurate fact checking, whereas it will take a little bit longer for those databases to kind of catch up. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of one that will be super, super current. I might have to do a little bit more research on that and get back to you guys. I can post that one once I find, if I do find one. I guess the one that I would recommend would be factcheck.org. That would probably be the soonest. They do stay pretty current with the news that comes out, because that's kind of the purpose of that particular site, is to respond to current news and to current misinformation. So that's a website that I definitely would recommend. For the library ones, it's really difficult to say if there's one that I would recommend for immediate fact checking. So off the top of my head, I'll say factcheck.org, contact your local library to talk to a librarian, or use the steps that are outlined in this presentation to immediately evaluate those sources.
Factcheck.org is life, apparently.
Yeah. Yes. Derek knows about life. It really is quite helpful. It's one of those sites that can help you navigate, like I said, the misinformation, and it is quite reliable. It has been, factcheck.org has been fact checked and verified by librarians and third parties. So it does really help.
Oh, that's awesome. I do have another quick little question for you, Julia, which is kind of more of an opinion, maybe. But as a librarian working in a very digital age, like how important is it for us to use our library as a resource and not just rely on the internet?
I'm going to give a very biased answer. Of course I am. But I feel that it is, as a librarian, of course, so it is going to be a little bit biased. I do feel like it is very important to utilize your public library for a couple of reasons. First of all, tax funded. You're already paying for it. We are here to help you. Libraries are, I'm going to kind of go on a library soapbox a little bit. Libraries are a wonderful democratic resource. We exist for equity and access. So we want to make sure everyone has access to quality information and resources. That is our entire mission and why we are here. We want to make sure people have access to education. We want to make sure people have access to resources and recreational resources as well. So from that standpoint, I highly, highly encourage everyone to utilize your public library. We are here to help you, and we help you for free. So in a fact-checking sense, one of the reasons that fake news can be so problematic is because there's so much of it. And sometimes it really feels like we're inundated with it constantly. We're inundated with information. And your librarians are here as trained professionals to help you navigate through the misinformation that can be out there. So to me, those are some great reasons why you should be utilizing your local public library. If we don't have a database that can meet your needs, like Sonia brought up the question of, like, can something immediately fact check? Do one of the databases do that? Even if we don't have one, we can locate you with a resource like factcheck.org that can help you fulfill your needs. So I do think it's incredibly important now more than ever, when we're bombarded with all this misinformation, to go to your information experts and get some free help. And that's what we're here for. We love helping people. We love connecting you with resources and information.
Yay.
Little library plug there. Can't help myself.
Oh, well, we love our library, and we love our Friendly Neighborhood Librarian. Thank you, Julia, for the presentation. You killed it.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you so much, you guys. It was so much fun to do it. And I'm just very excited to be a part of Lakeshore's United Visionaries. And I feel like the library's mission and LUV's mission really go hand in hand. So go team.
Yeah. Yay, team. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for a fun Friday night.
Yeah. Bye. That was wonderful. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us this evening. We've got some really cool things coming up in the next month or so, with Black History Month starting in a couple of days. Sonia's been busy working on some artsy stuff, and we've got some plans, so we're excited to share those with you. Before we let you go, obviously, we've got merch. Remember, Sonia also worked really hard on setting this up too, and she's a phenomenal artiste. So go check us out on lakeshoresunitedvisionaries.org.
We have more than just t-shirts. I just want to point that out.
Yes, we do. We've got so many things. Thank you, Sonia, for setting that up. All of the well, I don't know, Sonia, does all of the money come back to us or just a portion of it?
So the site that we go through, they take a certain amount, depending on what the item is, and then we get to keep any of the profit. Although it says, on the site, it will say my name, like Sonia's Activism Art, because that's my shop name. But in the descriptions, it will say which items go to Lakeshores United Visionaries. So anything with our logo on it definitely goes back to any profit goes back to the organization.
That's excellent. And I'm definitely going to be going and buying some stickers and stuff. And this shirt is the most comfortable shirt I think I've ever worn. So you should definitely check that out. You can also make monetary donations to our organization by visiting our website, lakeShoresUnitedVisionaries.com/donate, or if you like, you can send a cash or a check to First Presbyterian Church -Love. Their address is listed below. They're helping us out, and they're wonderful. They're wonderful for doing so. Of course, follow us on social media. If you're watching on Facebook, you already know how to find us. If you're watching on YouTube, you know how to find us. But we're also on Instagram at Lakeshores United Visionaries and on Twitter at Love Manitowoc. I think that's everything. I don't think I missed anything. But thank you all for spending another Friday with us. We will see you very soon for another Live with Love. Bye, Sonia.
Bye. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Bye.